Hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of Rant World with me, Notorious BLT. So, something I want to just kind of touch on. It's more of a story that's going to possibly segue into something else, I guess. I used to work at a local grocery store chain. And when I say, well, I guess it's local to where I live now and also to where my parents live. We don't really live that far apart, but, just for clarity. It was, at the time I lived I lived with my parents at the time. When I was going to college, I had two different jobs. The first one was at a call center, and the second one that I got after that, no. Am I getting the order mixed up? I'm getting the order mixed up. I'm fairly certain I'm getting the order mixed up. Right. I used to work at the grocery chain before wait. Dang it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which one I worked at first. Although I think it may have been the grocery store chain and then the call center. But anyway, what I want to focus on mainly is the grocery store for a couple of different reasons. One of them is my dad and my mom have not necessarily like a mantra or a saying or whatever, but their philosophy in life is that education becomes before most everything else, aside from like family, etc. You don't want to screw your family. You know what I'm saying? But sometimes that couldn't necessarily be held to. And the reason I say that is that when I was working at this grocery store chain, this manager for the position that I had I don't want to say it was a habit because she didn't do it all the time, but she did it enough that it became frustrating. Where I would say, hey, I have class at thus and such time. Please don't schedule me for work. And she would schedule me for work anyway. So there were classes that I ended up having to miss, which really sucked. And you may say, well, if you were staying at home with your parents, then why did you need to even bother going to work? Like, it's not like you needed the job. You are correct. I did not need it. However, I did not want any negative marks on for future employers if they were to call this place and say, hey, what's his work ethic like? And then have this person say, oh, well, he didn't show up to work. Because, they could just leave out the whole part about me being at class and them scheduling me when I said, hey, I'm going to be at class. Please don't schedule me during this time. Or actually, it was more like, just do not schedule me during this time because I have class. Please do not. And that's not to say that all my time at this place was negative or that this is the kind of thing that happened all the time, because that's not true. A lot of my experiences there were relatively positive, and a lot of my experiences there were very negative. And not necessarily because like the company itself is terrible or anything like that. That's not the case. But this one particular manager had a habit of not really listening when people would say, hey, I'm not going to be here during this and such time. Like, I remember I went to a Rent fair one year, and I told her I'm going to be gone for the entire weekend. So, and I told her, like, well ahead of time. I mean, we're talking, like, weeks ahead of time. So the schedule hadn't even been made. And I reminded her that when she was making the schedule. You may say, well, even if I was a lowly cashier or whatever, like, what right do I have to be, making rules like they're not making rules, but, talking to the manager in this fashion. Obviously, I'm not telling her just like, you can't schedule me. I'm just, I'm saying, hey, I'm going to be gone. Please don't schedule me because I'm not going to be able to come in. It's normally you want to just ask for the time off. But in this case, I mean, the tickets had already been paid for. What are you going to do? And I'm telling them well in advance. So it's not like there's an excuse to just, say, oh, well, no. Because my dad had a similar, well, maybe not a similar situation, but, long time ago, when he was taking the family to Europe, I think this was after I graduated community college, because I went to community college first, and then I went to what is now considered a university, but at the time was just considered to be a college. I really don't know what the actual difference is, other than just the word, but it doesn't really matter. Anyway, he had, I want to say it was like 6 months ahead of time, we had this whole thing planned, and all the tickets and everything were purchased, and A week before we're supposed to leave, my dad's boss says, hey, can you cancel your trip? Because the program that you've been working on, we're going to be implementing it, and I want to make sure that everything goes smoothly. And my dad was like, no. I can't put it off. We've already paid to do all this stuff. Like, there's no way. It's I understand, the perspective of some managers where it's like, I would very much like for you to be around because otherwise some crazy garbage might happen. Because my dad was basically the lead on this particular program. I forget what it was, but I think it had something to do with insurance. I don't remember, but and it doesn't really matter. What matters is that yes, this guy is worried about the implementation of this program, this thing, but that's really not a good reason to ask somebody who's had this time off plan for many, many months in advance to suddenly drop their plans so that you won't be nervous when something is implemented, like if something goes wrong. And, my dad wasn't like just leaving them in the lurch either. He had coached this kid, this Russian kid, on who was new there. I don't know why I mentioned his country of origin. It doesn't really matter. But he apparently was a very bright kid. This wasp that is flying outside my apartment is bothering the crap out of me. I think it's trying to build a nest on my window. What a jerk. Anyway, he had coached this kid in all the ins and outs of this particular piece of software, etc. So it's not like he just left them, with no recourse. They definitely had things they could do. But it's kind of that same kind of situation. It's one of those things where I see, and I know people that, I don't want to say that they're workaholics, but they seem to value what their jobs think over everything else, which I can't fully understand. I understand, you need to work to live, but that's about as far as it goes for me. I work to live, not live to work, is the phrase that I tend to use pretty often. And I'm very happy that my current employer feels that is a worthwhile perspective on life, because if not, I mean, not to say that I would quit my job or anything, because that's not the case. I mean, you like I said, you got to work to live. But trying to find a work-life balance can be very difficult for some people. And that's something that I try to keep, I don't want to say just in mind, but I try to keep that as, I'm not really sure how to put it. I try to keep a work-life balance as well as I can. Obviously, there are some times of the year where, I end up having to work far more than I normally would. Like any of you that have been watching for a while, you know that usually in the fall and winter, that's when my super busy season hits, and I am just at work all the time, and working from 8:30 to 8 at night, that kind of thing. And that's just, that's part of the job. There are some things that you certainly have to just kind of deal with. There are parts of the job that you just have to, know that you will have to deal with it, and that's just how it is. But in some cases, like with this whole thing with my boss at this grocery store chain, just basically willfully ignoring what I was saying. That to me is just, that's a jerkbag move. And I'm not saying that if you're a young person and you're at a job that you need and somebody does this stuff to you that you should quit. That is not what I'm trying to say, okay? By far, that is absolutely not what I'm trying to say. But if you can talk to somebody about this stuff and say, hey, this is not cool. I don't like that you're doing this, and also make sure that if you're going to talk to a boss person about these kinds of things, don't be adversarial. It doesn't help. But in general, talking to people about this kind of thing will help. But just understand that these people also have, not necessarily that they personally have needs, but they have an obligation to the company that they're working for to do their job and, get things done. And if they're, in a tough position, then also try to understand things from their perspective. In this case, there was no hard position that this person was in. She had other people that could come into the exact same job that I was doing, and other people that had offered to do so for those times because they wanted the hours. But instead, she decided not to. And this is just one of the negative things. But one of the really nice things was there was this manager there who I'm not going to mention his name because I don't know. The internet's a strange place, and sometimes people look up other people's names and they try to find them, and I don't want that to happen. But this guy, who I'll refer to as Ron, was one of the managers at this place. He wasn't my direct boss, but he was certainly. I think the way that this chain is set up is that there's like a bunch of different managers that are roughly at the same level that all kind of run the store together. They have an overall boss person, but they don't usually come to the store. They're like a regional manager, as I understand it. And this guy was like my managerial mentor, I guess is how I would put it. Dude told me stories about other places that he's worked, and he was one of these managers that a lot of the younger kids that worked there did not like because he was very hard on everyone, but he wasn't like a jerk. He was hard but fair. That's the way to put it. He was hard but fair. So, if he caught you slacking off or whatever, he'd be like, "Hey, get back to work." But if you did your job and you weren't like screwing around a bunch, then he didn't care. He would leave you alone. But I remember he was telling me, like, he also warned me about some of the stranger folks that come into this store. And that was one thing that he said that I have repeated many times, which is, you can work at a lot of different places and not really see a lot of the community around you. But when you work at a grocery store, everybody needs to eat. So you see all walks of life, like from hoity-toity people to people that are, kind of, that are not doing as well, to some people that are a little strange. There was this woman that actually a friend had warned me about, because he worked at this place long before I started. This woman that had been nicknamed Midnight Millie, because the store closes at midnight. Or at least it used to. I know it closes a little earlier now. Not that really matters. But she used to come in, shop for about 2 hours, and not come up to check out her groceries until just when the store was closing. Every time. And every time, there was always some issue with, like, a coupon or something that she didn't feel was being put through correctly. And, of course, nobody gave her flack to her face because that would be incredibly rude. And also, you're in a customer service place. Of course, it bothered me because I ended up having to work the closing shift a lot, and then I would have to go to school the next day. And I mean go to school at get up at 6 to be at school for 8. Because it takes me a little while to get ready for anything in the morning. Just my morning routine takes a little while. It's not like I'm super, trying to make myself look good or anything like that. It's just my morning routine tends to take a little while. Just various health reasons, and I'm not going to get into it. Just know that it takes me a little longer than usual. And plus, I always get like so greasy when I sleep. It's just the weirdest thing. So I always feel like I have to take a shower after sleeping. After I feel like I have to take a shower in the morning. But anyway, that's not the point. So something that I hadn't thought of at the time, because I was young and I don't want to say foolish, but not great at seeing other people's perspectives. And it's something that I had been thinking about recently, partially because I've been thinking of things to talk about for this particular show. But perhaps what it was is that this woman just doesn't like interacting with a lot of people, or maybe she has an anxiety about being around a lot of people. And for that, I can totally understand. But the one thing that I just cannot wrap my head around is why wait until the last minute to come in? Or to come up. Like, why do that? Is it maybe because she gets nervous about people being behind her in line? I don't know. But I remember one night, the night manager, who basically he was in charge of all the people that were restocking the shelves, etc. And when I say restocking the shelves, I don't mean just like little tiny restocks. I mean like they were filling the shelves with stuff. So all the stuff that had been taken during the day, they refill all of it. and, make all the shelves look nice and everything. So these are the people that sometimes you see if you go into a grocery store later in the evening. You'll see like these big pallets of stuff that are in the aisles. These are the guys that are putting all those things into into their particular spaces. But so this dude and I, we were the ones closing. It was basically just me and him and his staff. So I was the only one running a cashier because I was essentially, I guess the position could be called an assistant manager, I suppose. I think the actual title was something like customer service department head, which is such a misnomer because there was like 4 or 5 of us. So we were not the heads of our own departments because we were all, running the same department. But it doesn't matter. We were all deferred to this other person who was basically this other person who was the one that scheduled me for times that I was in class. There are times that I would have been in class. Anyway, so she comes up at just a little bit past 12, and we know she's in the store, so I'm making announcements on the intercom saying, hey, if you're in the store and you want to check out your groceries or whatever, please come up to the front, etc. Because people want to. I'm not saying people want to go home, but that's the underlying reason. People want to go home, and I'm sorry, but I have class in the morning. I'd like to actually be awake for it. So at like 5 after 12, she shows up and has, and if I recall correctly, our sales paper lasted from Friday to Thursday. So Thursday night, or no, I'm sorry, Thursday to Wednesday. Right. So this was a Thursday, or rather it was a Wednesday. So it was the last day that the sales that we had in the paper were valid. She comes up after 12 and then begins to complain that none of the sales are going through. Well, strangely enough, when we load in new sales, all of the registers do this weird thing where they start clicking and making all these noises. And so I had to point to him and say, well, actually the sales are resetting because it's no longer Wednesday, it's Thursday, so all the new sales are taking effect. She's like, no, it's still Wednesday. And of course the manager guy is up in the front. And I have to say, the tone that I'm using for her is much nicer than she was. She was not being very nice. But so the manager guy came up and he's like, no, the sales are resetting. And she was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And I said, well, it's past midnight, so it is actually Thursday. And finally she, I guess, is acquiesce the word that I'm looking for? She basically gave in and said, all right, fine, you're right, sure, whatever. And she took off, and the night manager came up to me and he said, man, that was a real line of BS you just fettered. Was that actually true? Because I don't know. And I was like, no, that's exactly what's going on. It's it's past midnight. That's what this means when the registers are all clicking. And I thought it was funny because I know that this dude had worked registers like that was what I was doing, was working the register, and doing the managing the cash and whatever. And he had worked registers long ago, but this was something that he had never learned. And it was something that I just learned, not from experience, but more from just, I guess, being around long enough. It was a very strange place to work sometimes. And, man, some of the most irritating times that I've had at work have been at that place. And not because of the people that I worked with, but the people that I had to work around. I don't want to say, saying that the customers were irritating is not correct, because for the most part, I would say like 90% of the people that came through were totally fine. But it was like that 10%. Actually, no, it was probably less than that. It was like 95% of them were fine. But then this little 5%, this 1 in 20, that was just, in some cases, extremely rude or annoying. I remember this one woman, when in the United States we have a lot of places have a Thanksgiving, but in the United States, ours kind of centers around like a turkey dinner if you eat meat. And so we get a ton of turkeys in, and frozen turkeys. And I remember very vividly this woman who came up with a huge thing of groceries. That's no problem. Like, checking out a big order, whatever, I don't care. She had, I think it was like 2 carts full of stuff. Two big shopping carts full of food. I guess she was preparing meals for a lot of people. But apparently she had gone and gotten her frozen turkey at the very beginning of her shopping extravaganza. And so it had defrosted a lot, and when she put it on the belt, this is going to be a little gross, I'm just going to warn you right now. Essentially, the semi-congealed liquid that came off of the bag that had turkey juice in it got all over the belt, like the belt that you put on your groceries on so that the person that's at the checkout can check out all your stuff. When I picked up this turkey to ring it up, there was what I can only describe as a snot bubble that formed underneath it and then exploded all over the front of me, including my face. Her response was to laugh, which of course I did not take very well. Of course I didn't say anything, because that's just what customer service is all about, but I did say, "Excuse me for a moment," and I took a paper towel and tried to wipe off my face, and I looked at my manager like, "Please let me go wash myself. I feel disgusting," because I basically just got a big old spray of salmonella right on my face. I got a big old visit from Uncle Sal. No thanks. And this guy that I told you about before, the one that was kind of like my mentor at this place, was just like, yes, he came over and he got one of the other people to come over and take the register for a second, so that I could go and wash up. But that was just like, that was probably one of the most irritating experiences that I had. There were a couple of weird experiences as well. Like, so if you don't know, a lot of construction workers, at least in the area that I live in, like in somewhat more rural areas. Well, then again, I shouldn't speak in generalities because I don't know for sure. But my understanding is that a lot of construction workers, etc., will get paid in cash instead of checks, and they usually get paid in large bills. Or at least, if I shouldn't say it's all construction workers. It's usually, I think, more like freelance type workers will get paid in cash, basically so that the employer doesn't have to pay taxes, or not pay taxes, but pay for all the employee benefits, etc. That's my understanding of why this generally happens. But there's a lot of dudes that would come in early in the morning and buy their breakfast, which that's fine. But the registers, because I also did a lot of opening shifts on the weekends and days when I didn't have class. So I remember this one morning, this guy came up with a donut, and we had just opened the store. Comes up with a donut, and so in the register we have a set amount of money that gets put in when you open a register, and it's not a ton, and it's not like a lot of different bills or anything. But this guy comes up. I say this all to illustrate a point, or maybe not illustrate a point, but to give you an idea of what's going on. Because the guy comes up with a donut and then attempts to pay with a $100 bill, which is currently only slightly less than I have in the register because like one or two people had come up and paid ahead of time. Or not ahead of time, but before this point. So I'm like, I'm sorry, dude, I can't take this. Like, you are just giving me a $100 bill and then going to take everything else out of the register, and I can't really do that. And so I had to call over one of the people at the customer service desk to come over and give me some change for this guy, because like, but I felt bad for him at the same time, because it's like, what the hell else is he gonna do? This is all he's got. Like, this dude seriously, like, recently just got paid. This is the only kind of bill that he has. What else is he gonna do? I can't, and I don't want him to go to his job hungry. And at the time, obviously, I was not thinking in this way. But now, if that were the case, I would be thinking about it in this manner. Because, like I said, at the time I was young and I wasn't really thinking about things that necessarily I was thinking of things in a more selfish fashion. Because what I was thinking is, man, this guy is really inconveniencing me. Which is really not the way to think about it at all. But so, everything went okay. We got things settled, but it took a little longer than you would normally expect, and there was a bit of a line that built up behind the guy, and that's not really a big deal, but a couple people were getting annoyed. Like, I remember this dude in a suit with a banana was like, "Hey, can we move this along?" And I'm like, "Listen, pal, like, what do you want me to do? I can't just, cancel this guy's stuff and then take you. Like, and now I feel bad for the dude, because it was, he clearly did not want to cause the trouble that he did, but what else is he going to do? He doesn't, doesn't have really another option. There have been so many strange experiences working with the public. It's like I said, you run into all kinds. Like, I remember there was another day where this guy, this older guy and his wife, I think they were probably in their 70s, or maybe their 80s, but both, like, the phrase Sunday best comes to mind because he was in like a 3-piece suit with a tie and like a pocket square, and she was wearing this really nice dress, and suddenly, and a couple of the people who had been around for a while started giving him like the side eye. Because it wasn't Sunday either. This was a weekday, I think. No, it wasn't a weekday. I'm sorry. This was a Saturday. It was a Saturday. It was a weekend, but it wasn't a Sunday. But a couple of people that had been there for a while were giving him the side eye, and I'm like, I'm sitting there wondering, like, why are my coworkers giving this person, like, the ocular business? And then he just starts singing Frank Sinatra out of nowhere. Like, nobody apparently asked him to do it, but he just starts singing Frank Sinatra super loud. And the reason I know it was Frank Sinatra is because a couple of my coworkers told me it was Frank Sinatra. I don't really know anything about Frank Sinatra, so I don't, I did not identify the song. It was my coworkers that did so. But afterwards, one of my older coworkers who had been at this place for a while tells me that guy beats his wife, and I'm like, what? Why are you telling me this? This does not need to be said. At all. Like, what? I did not even ask. But then it started making me feel horrible, because I'm like, holy crap, did we just let this guy go home with his wife who he's going to abuse? Like, what the heck? And I sincerely hope that my coworker was just making crap up, because this is a lot more serious than I wanted to get, but it's just... I think you all know where I'm kind of going with this. It's a horrible thing. Like, I can't say anything to this guy, because what if what my coworker just told me is not true? And I see no evidence of this. Like, she didn't look like she had any injuries, or she wasn't like being super quiet or anything around him. I mean, she seemed a little embarrassed when he started singing, but hey. But I mean, I was also very far away, so maybe there were things that I could have seen, but I really don't know. I really don't know. But it seemed to me to be one of those things where it's like, we're in a smaller town, and sometimes, like, people get stories in their heads, and they just repeat it without really checking or, being absolutely sure. And I mean, how do you check in a case like this, honestly, though? There's not really a good way to check to see if there's some kind of domestic violence going on. And that's not to say that, this is a very heavy subject for what I wanted to be talking about. And I'm laughing nervously because I don't know where to go from here. I'm not laughing because the situation was actually funny. Quite the opposite, actually. But, I guess I say all this to accidentally get into the subject of saying, if you think something not great is going on, check with the person that you think something might be happening to, and sometimes their responses may be telling. I don't know, but I'm the kind of person that doesn't like to stick their nose in other people's business, but there are certainly times where I think it is warranted. Like, if you're a teacher or something and a kid comes to your class or your school and they have bruises or something, and it's constant, like it's always happening, then maybe ask some questions. But you can't always make assumptions, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And now I don't know what else to say. Aside from, I hope you all enjoyed this episode. And if you did, you know what to do. That is going to be it from me, Notorious BLT. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I will catch you all next time. Bye-bye, folks.